right. So the general idea for review sessions for me is that you can ask questions, you bring questions. We essentially really did a review session in class yesterday, the sort of broad review session of what we've done so far in the course in terms of the outline of things. I still have that note actually. Whoops, interesting. No, that's not it. Sorry, February 14th. And I'll bring that up just as a starting point. So I'll share my screen. Everybody can hear me okay, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So everybody can see that my iPad screen, right? Let me move something out of the way here. So this is what I had in class yesterday. In terms of thinking about what we've done in the course so far, right? If we think about the whole thing is about macroeconomics. What's coming in here? If we think about the whole thing as macroeconomics, and then we can sort of break that into, whoopsie.
Oh, the prices are right.
We can break that into sort of long-run growth and business cycles, right? In those two buckets. And what we've done really in class and what we're doing in class is really underneath the long-run growth part. But we're going to talk about business cycles, but that won't be until we get to, in terms of our model anyway. We've been talking about business cycle stuff, right? That's what's in the news generally. Until chapter 7 and really chapter 8 and chapter 9. And we will use the model that we're developing now, but we won't have the full model together until we get to that point. So most of the action's been over on this left side, right? So we've talked about the labor market and production function. Those are two parts of our model, big model so far. And then growth accounting and how do we account for growth in the macroeconomy, standard of living overall, long term. Okay, sorry, I haven't seen a note coming on my screen. Okay. And then we're going to go to another part of the long run model in chapters 4 and 5 in the next section that we do in the course starting next week. So this is the part that where economists, whether they're Keynesians or classicals, something we talked about back in chapter 1, right? Sort of background information in chapter 1 ends with that, what the macroeconomy, what macroeconomics is all about, just kind of a background, or not just a background chapter, I should say. And then chapter 2, right, dealing with how we measure the economy, including, things like real GDP, talking about GDP, real GDP, nominal GDP, price indexes, inflation, right? In chapter 3, we talked about employment and unemployment rate. Talked about interest rates. Right? All the things, how we measure all those things. Plus, we talked about this uses of saving identity, which we've also seen in homework question. So that, it's sort of in a nutshell, is the big picture summary of what we have done in the course so far, or where we're where we're headed, right? So, right, the parts that we have really focused on here. Whoops, sorry. Hit that button. right, is really about this part right here, right? Chapters 3 and 6, and then chapters 1 and 2 were just kind of separate, introduction and how we measure things in the economy, including the uses of saving, identity, and all the macroeconomic variables that we look at. Now, separate from that or alongside that, we've also, right, every day we typically start by talking about, right, the Wall Street Journal, what's happening in the actual economy, the data reports that come out, right? And these are the macroeconomic indicators, right? So how is the macroeconomy, the overall economy, what's actually happening on a daily basis, right? And that really has to do with the business cycle, right? The business cycle. Are we in a business cycle expansion? Are we in a recession? Happening to inflation, the unemployment rate, et cetera, on a day by day, month by month kind of basis, right? So that's another thing that we're doing sort of side by side. Our model ultimately, right, when we get to chapter 8 and 9, we'll be able to use our model to explain why those things are happening and what policymakers, what options they have and what kind of impacts they have. So this is where we'll develop our model to explain those things. But for right now, we need to keep track of what's actually happening. Like we need to understand what's going on in the actual US economy on a day-by-day basis. That's what economists do. That's what macroeconomists do. If you're at career fair next week and or you're talking to Walmart in the lobby day next Tuesday, and they find out you're an economics major, and you're a junior, senior, they could ask like, well, so tell me about the economy and what kind of impact might that have on Walmart, et cetera. So you should be able to have some kind of answer for that sort of thing at this point. Okay. Whether they're going to do that, I don't know, but you should be able to answer that kind of question. Or actually, you should be able to volunteer them. Like, hey, I'm learning about the economy. I know how that impacts, how that's likely to impact you, whether it has to do with logistics, whether it has to do with sales, et cetera, right? The economics really underlies all of that. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you ask questions. I'll respond to them. They could be on the whiteboard here. They could be just generally answered. We'll see. I'm going to let you go ahead and ask questions. Anything's fair game. Let me turn it over to you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the review that you put on Blackboard, hold on, I'm trying to pull it up really quickly.
The review questions, you mean?
Yeah, the review questions. I
Okay.
was just going to ask about for what I put for number 1. Sorry, I'm still trying to pull it up.
Right, you'll have to tell me because I don't have it up on my screen. Right.
Okay. I'm about to pull it up.
I mean, I can get to it, but yeah, on my other screen.
Oh, here it is. Okay, so basically, I think you were asking about like taxes and like investment and how that would impact like GDP, I believe. And my
I can read
train
the
of
question
thought
for
for
you if
that
you
one,
didn't pull it up yet, Sullivan. I
huh?
have it up. Did you want the question? I have it
Yeah,
pulled
can you pull
up.
it up? Can you like
Do
read it?
you actually want to
Yeah,
share the screen, you mean? Or do you want to just tell me?
I was just going to read the question. So it says, in December 2017, Congress passed a major tax bill that cuts both personal and corporate income taxes. In addition, the president's new federal budget includes a significant increase in spending on new infrastructure. Together, the tax cuts and spending increases are projected to raise the US federal budget deficit significantly in the years ahead. And then it says A, according to the uses of savings identity, what are the possible outcomes of this projected significant increase in government budget deficits? And B, how will increased budget deficits likely affect the economy in the long run? Explain using graphs of the production function in the labor market. Does it matter whether the deficits are caused by a reduction in taxes or an increase in government spending on infrastructure?
So where do you
Yes.
start? Where do you start with that? Where would you start with that?
So I started off with just talking about the uses of saving identity, which is
Okay.
S equals I, which is investments plus current accounts. And I said that the outcome of a projected increase in a budget deficit lowers the country's current account balance, which decreases the country's overall saving, which makes the country like less wealthy.
Okay, so let's think about this. All right, so let's take those pieces, let's take each piece, right? So if there's a government budget deficit, which piece? So this whole thing is national saving, right? This whole thing, it's private saving plus government saving, right? So saving by, so in chapter 4, we're actually going to dig into this and model this, especially the private saving part. Government saving has to do with the government's budget and taxes and whether it increases saving or not, right? So the takeaway there is what the government budget deficit's going to projected to increase, right? Right, it says. So where would you start with that in the uses of saving identity? Which one of those 4 things?
You're talking about the investment part.
No, talking about budget deficit. That's
Oh,
that's
yeah,
the first. That's the first. That's the information you're given, right? That
Yeah,
there's this new
current.
bill, and that's gonna, and the projection is that it's going to increase the budget deficit.
So
Yeah.
the current accounts would decrease, right?
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Right. So that's the government's budget surplus right there, that part. That's what, so saving by the government, right? If you go back to chapter 2, right, it's going to be the tax revenue that they take in, minus government spending that they do on new goods and services, minus interest that they have to pay on the debt, minus transfer payments that they make to people, right? So Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, etc. Right? So this is all the stuff. This is the revenue, right, for the government, right? If you go back and you go back to chapter 2, this is what you'll see. This, right? This is what they take in. This is the income for the government, right? And then they got to subtract off all this stuff, right, that they pay out, right? And so if they're running a deficit, it means that all of this stuff, right, is bigger than what they take in tax revenue, right? That's what it means, right? So that's SG. And if that's a positive number, that's a budget surplus. If it's a negative number, it's a budget deficit, right? So minus SG is the budget deficit. So this is this is in chapter 2, right? This is right. That is part of the derivation of this uses of saving identity, right? So what's the first thing that happens? This is going down. Like, that's the deal, right? So like, you wouldn't have to do all the stuff I just did in purple there, right? In answering this, I'm just explaining that here, right? So that's the information you're given, right? Essentially, that's what happened. Like, that is the net result of that nugget that was in that question, exam question, right? So now, what's the rest of it? what impact, right? So what happens? This is not a curve question in this case, or a graph question, right? But it's the same idea. Something happens. What happens? Budget deficit increases. That's what we're told, right? That's the setup. Then, not which curve, which way, what happens, but now which things in the equation and what happens, right? So there's an equal sign here, right? Right? There's an equal sign right there, right? So, like we could put, like you can put numbers in, like you can do this, like it doesn't matter what the numbers are, you just have to make sure they're equal on both sides. So let's say that's 100, let's say that's 100. Let's keep it really simple. Let's say that's 100, and let's say that's 100. Like you could pick whatever numbers you want. But, right, this has got to be true, right? Whatever numbers you pick on the left side got to equal stuff on the right side, the sum of the things on the right side. So now this isn't 100 anymore. It's, I don't know, it's 80 or 90 or 50 or whatever. Yeah, we okay so far? No, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this isn't balanced anymore, right? So if I go down here, this is 180. This side's 200, right? That does not equal that, right? So what has to happen? Something needs to happen, right? Because this has to be equal. That's what the uses of say. It's an identity. That's what it means, right? So how can they? So the question, the way to answer that question is like the way to get at this is like, well, what could happen here that could make them equal again? Both sides equal.
Is it something has to decrease on the other side?
Could be, or, right? So either this side has to go up to 200, right? Or this side has to go down to 180, right? This is the part that's the one that you just said, right? Two possibilities, right? So one way to make them equal is if private saving went up, right? Like it went up to 120. Then they'd be equal again, right? So that's one possibility, right? What's another possibility? So now, Sullivan, we're at the place where you could say something about what you said. One possibility is this gets smaller, right? This goes down, right? That's where you started.
Mhm.
That's not the place to start, but that's a possibility. So that could go down to 80. Then both sides are 180 equals 180, right? But that's just one possibility, right? Another possibility is that goes down, right? So, so by itself, the budget deficit could make investment go down. That's new capital. That could affect the production function, right? But we also know, right, from the information that was given, right, that the infrastructure bill, right? The infrastructure bill, right, is meant to do what? What is it aimed at? What is it doing?
That's investment, right?
Right? So, boom, it's going to increase investment. Now, if that got bigger and that got 120 and that's still 100, well, now it's 220 doesn't equal 180. So what would have to happen? Well, that would have to come down, right? Right. So that could be 120 if this went down to 80. Sorry, if that went down to 60, right? That'd be 180 equals 180, right? In other words, the critical part here is this equal sign. You got to make both sides equal, right? And so if this goes up, right? If the I goes up, then something else has got to happen, right? Because this left side went down, right? So that's why this is it's just only 4 letters, but it's really, really valuable, right? So that's going to happen in the future, presumably the investment's going to happen in the future, not right away, right? The bill gets passed, increases the budget deficit. But if we were looking at the, what's the point of this? What is the aim of this, right? So, and if personal taxes are going down, right, people have more money to spend, they're going to spend more money out of their current income, right? So private saving presumably is not going up unless they save all their tax refund, right? But so now it's the second part of this question is about the labor market and the production function, right? Where we need to draw, we need to draw the starting points, label everything on the graph, full employment level of employment, real wage, equilibrium real wage. Here's employment. Up here, it's employment, and it's real GDP on the axis. Now we can take this level of employment and go straight up. That level of employment with, right, this is y equals a times k to the 0.3. You can call it k naught, because that's an a naught, that because we're assuming that those are fixed right now, times n to the 0.7, right? Then with that amount of labor, with this amount of capital and technology, right, and total factor productivity, this is going to be the full employment level of GDP, right? So that's our starting point. We haven't done anything yet with the problem, right? They pass the infrastructure bill and investment goes up, what's going to happen? The goal of that, or what does our theory say is going to happen?
As investment goes up, you said,
Yeah,
the long run,
Right.
standard of living of everybody.
yeah. But tell me what happens on the graph. I mean, that you're telling me the end of the story, maybe, right? There's a whole bunch that happens in between there that you got to explain, that you have to explain.
The production function increases, right?
Yep, that's right. That's exactly right. Right. So let's do that. Let's use green. Right. So it's going to be an increase in K, right? Its investment is capital, right? So that it goes through the origin. Remember that, right? It's going to increase. What happens to the slope? What happens to the slope of the production function if it tilts up like that?
Does it increase?
Take the question mark off. It has to increase, right? If something is tilting up, all right, it has to increase, right? That's a critical point, is that because it goes to the origin, it tilts up, right? And we did examples of this in class on the worksheet, and they did a homework as well. And so, here's the slope. Well, come on. Here's the slope, and now if we went straight up, that slope is higher. Right? It looks kind of the same, but it's higher. Right? It's bigger. So what's the slope of the production function? What is it? What economically? What is it? What's the slope? Change in y. Rise over run. Right. Rise is y on the vertical axis. Run is n on the horizontal axis. What do we call that? The extra output you get with one extra worker?
Marginal
What?
product of labor.
Marginal product of labor. So as the slope goes up, that's the slope. That means the marginal product of labor goes up. Now, the marginal product of labor goes up. What happens to labor demand or labor supply? Which one's affected?
Is it the supply?
Not the supply. go back and look at the solution to the homework, because this a version of this question is essentially on the homework, right? About related to technology, right? It's not infrastructure. In that case, it was technology, robots, right? And AI, right? Same, but graphically, it looks exactly the same, right? So if workers get more productive, they're more valuable, right? Profit maximization, right? Says hire more as long as the marginal product of labor is greater or equal to the real wage, right? And so now the marginal product of labor is increased, right? And so they're going to want to hire more. You're going to want to hire more workers. Labor demand curve shifts to the right. What does that do? That raises the level of employment. Right, we move to a point B here. It raises the real wage. More employment. Same N1 is down there. All right. Now we're on a new production function because the old one's not really there anymore, right? Because now this is the more productive workers. Sorry, that should have said A there. This is A, not B. Sorry. This is B. All right, this goes with the B here. So what happens to real GDP? It goes up, right? This is bigger than here. What happens to employment? It's increased. What's happened to the real wage? It's gone up. So the question is, what's the impact of that infrastructure bill? I have to go back and look at the question, right? So we can look at it from the point of view of the uses of saving identity. You can look at it from the point of view of the production function. And we can use both those to say, well, it's going to increase real wage, it's going to increase employment, it's going to increase real GDP. Right? So we want to be able to use our model to be able to understand what's going on, and we can translate, right, real world examples, real world data, headlines, news stories, etc., policy into our model. In other words, we can use the model to explain it. Questions about that? So the uses of saving identity is from chapter 2, and we can relate that to the material that's in chapter 3. Every chapter essentially builds on the other chapters. We're going to be able to talk about, I said, private saving in chapter 4. We're going to add graph that goes with that. Saving and investment, actually, both. So we're going to be able to actually talk about everything in the uses of saving identity with a model. It was just an identity before, so we can't be sure which of the things is going to happen. But with a model, we can show each one of those, and we'll be able to show, yeah, it increases capital, it increases, and we're going to bring the real interest rate in that case, then, and show what happens to that. In chapter 5, we'll be able to show that what happens at the current account, because the current account is essentially our trade surplus or deficit. So the heart of answering that question wasn't everything that I did there, but that was explaining each piece as we went. It's what happens with that uses of saving identity and what happens with the graph. Right? Like that's the real core of that answer. these are actual exam questions. So that's a good example of kind of how the things tie together. We can answer that question. I have it pulled up on my screen now. How we can answer that question using things that we learn at different points in the semester. Like, I could ask that question on the third exam, and we'd even be able to answer it even more richly. So I could ask, what's the impact in the short run as well? We'll have our whole model then. So you could see a question like that again later. Other
So
questions?
does
Go ahead.
doesn't this kind of answer number 2 as well?
Yeah, it would number 2, the graph would look exactly the same, actually. Yeah. Yep. Right, which is number 2 is what was one of the homework questions. Right. The scenario A in homework number 2. I don't remember.
So the difference between the questions is the first one is talking about is it capital and capital investments?
Yes, infrastructure. Yep.
Okay. And then the second one is talking about
really a change in A in the
okay.
production function, right? And this production function here, right? Whoops, it keeps undoing my pen, but right in the here. Let me redo it. So getting really cluttered up there, right? So labor demand, labor supply, production function, real GDP. Right, so here's the equilibrium in the labor market. All right, so this is the labor market. So the production function, aggregate production function. All right, those are the 2 pieces of our model so far. We're going to add another graph in chapter 4, right? Not instead of we're going to add a third graph, then there'll be a 4th one. And then we're going to put them all together in one graph when we get to chapter 9. Which is why it's important to understand the pieces now along the way, because we're not, like, you can't forget about them after this exam. For example, we're going to keep building on it, right? So that's why it's important to understand the pieces along the way, because otherwise later on it becomes really difficult to sort of catch back up. So here's our model that we have, and I'm just marking with an A so that we know where we're starting. All right, there's our macroeconomic model at this point. Like, that's it. Like, 2 graphs, 3 lines. That's it. But we can do a lot with that. That's the point, right? And it's important that you really understand that. So remember, this is y equals a times k to the 0.3 n to the 0.7. And the assumption is, when we draw it, that we have fixed amounts of levels of A and K, right? And if you change one of those, right? So it's just y equals some number times n to the 0.7. And if you change that for any n, y is going to get bigger, which is a shift up in the production function, except when n is 0, y is 0 no matter what a and k are. Right, so it's always through the origin. So so to draw that graph over, right, that we just had, right, that shift could come from either an increase in k or an increase in a in this production function, right? A change in n is going to move you along the curve, right? And if a or k changes, right, that is going, and if it's an increase, like we're saying here, then that's going to increase the slope, which increases the marginal product of labor, which then leads to a shift in labor demand, right? So in chapter 3, and this will be true in chapter 4 as well, right? There is a table, and you got it as a handout in the folder as well, because I literally cut and pasted it out of there on a Word, in a Word document, right? Is a table that shows what happened, what causes, what kinds of things cause a change in labor supply or a change in labor demand, and which way, increase or decrease, right? So if you go back and look at that, it will say an increase in labor productivity, an increase in the capital stock, an increase in total factor productivity, which is A, right, will shift labor demand to the right, right? So in that case, this is a new equilibrium, increase in employment. So I'm just redrawing what we just did, right? So there's the equilibrium real wage rate. If we draw them right above each other, right, it's convenient because then we just go straight up. That's the new level of employment. And, you know, here's the new level of full employment, potential GDP, right? Potential GDP. So we've gone from A to B due to what? Due to one of these two things. If we just looked at the graph alone, just by itself, without, oops, I don't want to erase it, sorry. By itself, we wouldn't know which one of those two it was. Right. So 1 and 2 on the not review questions, on the exam questions from previous exams, that document, right? Each one of those is an example of either A or K increasing. To go back to your comment, that's right. So same. So you know, in the end, there are only a limited number of questions I can ask. There are only a limited number of things that can happen. Something shifts labor demand to the right, or something shifts it to the left. Something shifts labor supply to the right, or something shifts labor supply to the left. Like, really, that's it. And then, you know, because anything that's just labor demand is going to be tied to the production function. So those two are connected, right? And so anything can either shift the production function up or down. So really, there are only a limited number of possibilities. It's sort of like multiple choice. Like there are only about 4 possibilities, and so any question you get is going to be some variant of that. That's the power of economics, is that we simplify. We can take some complex thing that happens or we hear about in the news, or that we're trying to analyze, or if I'm an aide to a congressman or woman, then you know I can boil it down to, what does the model say? It helps to really simplify that, and then you know, and if there's some other factor that's happening, then we can add that into the model. But our models help us to really keep all the extraneous stuff kind of out and just focus on what's critical, what's important. And that's a real skill. This is a problem solving skill. So in a company, right, a company has some complex challenge, some complex issue, and they have to figure out, how do we solve this problem? Maybe it's maybe there's a I don't know, there's some spill of chemicals or something, or there's something happens in the world economy that like COVID, that changes our supply lines and ability to get products from another country and all that. What do you do, right? So our economic models help in that way of thinking, helps you to cut through all of the complexity to the things that are most important, so that you can focus on that and make rational decisions. So it's one of the reasons why economics majors are really valuable and get really good salaries in the world, because that's a skill that we develop throughout the major, and that's really a valuable one. Not all majors do that. So just an example of that. By the end of the course, you really should be able to say, here's something, read something, and be able to think about, like, okay, where does that fit in this model? What's going to happen? You should be curious about that. You should always be curious about that. Like, what's going to happen? I hear something. How does that, like, what's going to happen? You know, and we use our models to do that.
I have a quick question about the journals.
Yeah,
I remember you saying in class that they're going to be due like the last week of the month.
correct.
So is it the last full week of the month? Because I know
It'll be the last day of the month.
Oh, okay. Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Literally the last day of the month. It'll be the last.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I can answer that directly. Yeah. So the reason for that is the economic indicators come out generally on a monthly schedule, right? So any of the economic data that comes out, it's not exactly true. There's some data that comes out weekly, but the ones that we really generally care about most come out monthly. And so yeah, new month, new start, right? So you'll always see the CPI figures come out usually the second week in the month. Labor report, unemployment rate, employment will come out first week in the month, etc. You know, so yeah, start a new cycle beginning of the month. I'll post some. I'll hope to post something on Friday. Sort of giving you even. I mean, we talked enough about it, but even in class too. But sort of help frame your posts. They're more for they're as much for yourself as for me. I will check the journals at the end of the month, but you're going to have to generate a summary of the economic indicators that month and what they're saying about the economy, and that will come from your journal postings. They're for yourself. Other people can't see them. I can see them, but nobody else can see them. They're really for you. But I'll grade those will enter in as part of your grade as well, the actual postings, number, quality, etc. They're not meant to be like really long. They're meant for you to keep track of things along the way, so that later on when we do the macro briefing report, you can go back and look at those, and they're like notes in a notebook basically, and you can say, oh, this is what happened 2 months ago, because you're not going to remember that otherwise. I wouldn't remember it either. You know, it's like an old economic diary. It's an economic journal. That's what it is. Yeah.
I have one more quick question. How many questions will be on the exam tomorrow?
Good point. Good question. I meant to say that yesterday in class. So generally, like lots of things in life, it depends. But typically, I will have. I'm looking at the questions that I actually have them on my other script, so I'm looking over to the side here. That you are all looking at and have up on yours too. So you'll see that they typically have more than one part to them, right? So there probably will be roughly 5 questions, but it depends on what, but there are probably parts to them. And so the parts are meant to, oftentimes they might be steps in the process, or they're all things related to that question, right? So 5, 6 questions probably, but usually multiple parts. In other words, to break it down so it's not just sort of this big vague or less defined question. So it's really to try and help direct your questions or answers. I mean.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Can this review session be put on Blackboard after this or no?
I will. Before you came on, I was saying that yeah, so I'm recording and I will I have a couple different ways I could do it, but I'll probably, well, no, I've made a decision to do this essentially, but I'll upload it into YouTube and I'll create it, I'll post it as a YouTube link. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But it'll take a minute. I've got I don't need to do much. I don't really need to do editing, but I need to like do it just at the front and back end, probably, maybe not. But then I need to upload. It'll take a little while to upload and get, kind of into YouTube. Takes a little while to do that before it becomes available. Not that long, but so within an hour or two, it should be there. Maybe less. After we're done. But yes,
I'm not sure if you said this already, and I'm sorry if you did, but so would you say that these two graphs will be like pretty much all we're focusing on for the exam?
No. But it'll be on the exam. It'll be part of the exam for sure. No, because this is chapter 3. We have stuff from chapter 6. We got stuff from chapter 2, stuff from chapter 1. Like there'll be stuff from all the chapters in general. Yeah. Less from chapter 1. I mean, it's sort of kind of, but that's it's an introductory chapter, but that'll get blended into some questions as well. All right. We have the chapter 6, we have the growth accounting, we've got the uses of saving identity. We have we have how to measure GDP, how to measure inflation. So you can look at so a couple of different things. You can use the exam questions that we were just talking about here, right? And so let me just make this really clear. I did say it in class, but let me write it down here. Come on. All right. So we have if you look at the previous exam questions, right? They don't all deal just with those graphs, right? That's why I share those. Right, we have that. We have previous exam questions. We have separate from that. There are review questions that are there, right, in the material for exam preparation or exam studying, right? And the review questions by chapter, right? Then we have homework 1, homework 2, and the solutions to homework 3 were available about 1 a.m. last night. So those solutions are there. In other words, you have the homework. Homework is also a guide. We have things like the rule of 70, right? Things like that. You'll see pieces of like that. None of that's a mystery. That's you'll see that in some of the exam questions. Even if you don't have to even like sort of start with number 1 and go through it. You just kind of scroll through them and you can kind of get a feel for the variation and the kinds of things that you could possibly see. And then we have right, you have the JIT questions for fair game, things from that's fair game. And then we have any handouts from class, from the folders, right? So all of those things give examples of the kinds of things that you could see on the exam. So if we look at the homework solutions, am I going to have you go out and get data from Fred, etc.? No, but I could give you data. And I could have you say something about that. for example. You know, if we talk about the uses of saving identity, you've seen that in a couple of places. You saw that we just had that in the exam question, like, you know, that seems like that probably a useful thing, right? I'll give you that an exam question. Like, it's not that's not the point, is to use it, not to memorize it. That's why you get the note sheet, right? So don't forget about that, right? So, right, the note sheet, right, 1 page, 1 side, 8.5 by 11 inches. Right. The reason I make that really specific, it was it didn't happen to me, but somebody else was somebody else that I knew thought they could bring in 1 page, a note sheet, and like somebody brought in like a poster board size. They didn't make any stipulation about that. Anyway, handwritten. I'll collect those along with the exam responses tomorrow. Right. So what will happen is you will get the exam questions, and then you will get, you know, blank sheets of paper. I'll bring the paper. And you will do this. I'll take your exams and scan them. And so you'll get them back in the same way you get homework back, right? In Blackboard. So you'll have that in Blackboard when they're done. So you know, that's the process. Remember, you can bring a calculator. I would do that. Not your phone calculator, a calculator. All right. You may or may not need that, depends. Yeah, those are really the 2 things, right, that you need, pen or pencil. So. For the exam. You know, if you go back and look, I don't, I'm not telling you need to do this, but if you go back and look in the syllabus, I will tell you, it says in there, homeworks like students find this really helpful, blah, blah. You know, I will tell you that, right, it's gonna look and feel, no surprise. And if you look at at those, like, those are real exam questions, like those are real exam questions. Then, you know, they look and feel a lot like homework questions. That's why homework is has a higher weight than, say, JITs or review questions for the chapters, etc. Right? Because they're a lot like they have the same. They're gonna have the same look and feel as the homework questions. Those are the closest things, probably, that in the course that the exam questions generally. Yeah. So I said, like, generally, you know, 5, 6 questions. And usually, doesn't always the case, but usually they have multiple parts, multiple connected parts. Yeah. Other questions and anybody has?
I have a question.
Yep.
Can we go over how to measure GDP, the product approach, the exponential approach, and the income approach?
Okay. So production, right, it really is just the definition, right? So what's the definition of GDP? I generally don't ask definitional questions because you could put them on your note sheet, but this is one you should know.
What's the market value of final goods and services?
That will get you. Let's see. Say it again. No, say it again. I got it. So say what you just said.
I said it's the market value of all final goods and services.
Okay. I didn't hear the final part. All right. So okay, before. So okay. So the market, that's why I want to make sure I heard it right. Market value of all final goods. That's final goods and services. There's a little bit more to that, but it's the market value, right? That's a key. All of these are key words in here, right? Produced in an economy in a year, right? Right. So it's economy specific, it's country specific, right? Time period is a year, right? And so final goods and services, that's critical, right? So not goods that were previously sold. So used cars don't count as part of GDP in that year because they were already what? Counted when it was sold as a new car, right? So used houses, right, that are resold don't count in GDP, right? So it's a transaction that happens, right? But they count that house counted when it was sold as a new house, right? Doesn't count again, be double counting, right? That's the production side, right? So now in terms of spending, right, expenditures, right, we just need to think about who's that. So this is the production side, right? Well, who's buying the stuff that's produced? Consumer spending plus firm spending, investment plus government spending on final goods and services, right? That's not all government spending, because some government spending is transfer payments, right? Taking from one group, taxes that they've gotten from one group and giving it to another group, like Social Security, like Medicaid, Medicare, etc. Right? They're just taking the taxes that come in and repurposing them to somebody else, right? And net exports, right? So these are the different groups that are in the economy: consumers, businesses, government, and other countries, right? So net exports are exports minus imports. So that's the way we would add up spending in the economy. So you can remember the orange ink and juice ink example that we did back in chapter 2. The only thing that was in there was consumer spending. We didn't have it. It was a really, really simple example, right? Firms weren't buying, and you can look up what's all investment, and you go look back in chapter 2, right? It's buying a new capital, right? New warehouses, new delivery trucks, new factories, new machines, robots, etc., right? That a company buys for the production process. And then we have, right, income, right? And what we learned in that example is we can add up all of the income, right? Like wages and salaries, rental income that people get from renting out, properties, renting out machines, etc., interest income that people get. No, sorry, it's income. So this, what I meant here is labor income up here, right? rental income. See anything else? If I missed any other big category there with income. So it's all the income that gets paid out. Oh, taxes. Sorry. That's income for the government, right? So all the income that gets generated in the production, and then the spending is all the profits, right? Income for the company, right? After they paid their wages and salaries and paid out rent and any interest on debt they have and taxes to the government, right? And the spending is what generates the revenue, right, for the companies that are producing the goods and services, right, the production. And then they pay that out in terms of income to people in one of these categories. So we think about this in terms of what's called the circular flow model. This is not a picture that's in your book, but you learned about it in ECON 201. So we'd have companies over here. We'd have households over here. We have, let's say, the government in the middle here, right? And so the firms, right, are sending goods and services, right, to households, right? Or well, you can think about that. We'll put the arrow the other way, right? They're buying goods and services from the companies. Companies are paying wages and salaries, right, to households in return for labor, supplying labor, right? And some of the money is going to the government in taxes. Companies are spending buying other goods and services. That's investment, right? Households are also putting taxes there. And then the government is putting into the economy government spending, right? Right. So the circular flow really is the idea that, right, goods and services, right? There's demand for goods and services by households that generates revenue for firms. Revenue gets paid out in these different forms of income, right? Which then generates more demand for goods and services, and this goes around and around and around and around, right? But some comes out in the form of taxes along the way, right? But then gets put back in. Government also gives transfer payments to households, right? So just another way of thinking about that listing of the 3 different ways of measuring GDP. Whoops. So those are the three different ways, and we did the worksheet in class about that with this juice ink and orange ink in a really simple way. So what we saw, we could there was labor income, there was wages that were paid, there were taxes that were paid, profits. These two were not in that simple example that we had. And there was no government spending or buying or selling from other countries or buying of new capital. It was just consumption. Those are really simple examples. Oh, I, G, and NX were 0, right? And then we could just add up the market value of all the final goods and services that were produced, and then we assume that they were all sold. Oh. So any final? I know we're at that. We're past the time, 6:30, 7:30. But may have a final question they want to ask. I don't want to keep you here real long, and I'm going to go eat dinner myself.
I have one more.
Okay.
It's kind of from the homework that was due last night. Trying to figure out this. I'm trying to look at the question. It was how much larger the 3.1% growth rate Then under the 1.8% growth rate. So I just really just wanted to know like how to calculate that.
All right, did you
And
look at the solutions? The calculations in the solutions. The solutions are available in Blackboard. All right, but man, I'll go through it. I mean, I'll go through it, but you can actually see the numbers there, right? It's the calculation is actually there. So let me go through it here. So in this case, it's China and the US, right? Or no, which one? No, that's you want the other one, right? Sorry, you want the other one. I know what you're talking about, but this it's a similar idea, but you want the other one. So this is the US, right? All right, and we have a starting point. I'm just going to pick a number. This is the number is actually given in the homework question. I don't have that up right now, but let's just say it's I don't know. Let's say it's $2,000, right? GDP. Let's say that's GDP. Let's say that's GDP today, right? Right. And let's say it's growing by 1.8%, and then versus what was it? What's 3.1?
yeah, 3.1.
Okay. So I said you really want to do this you don't have to do it in a spreadsheet. You could do it. There are other ways to do it, but this is what you do, right? So if this is a spreadsheet, right, with all the different cells in it, right? All right. So this is year 0, let's say. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Right? How much is GDP going to be next year if it grows by 1.8%? It's going to be 2,000 times, or 2,000 plus. We can do it either way. We can do it 2 ways. 2,000 times 0.018. Come on. 0.0, which is the what's going on? Come on. Stop. 0.018, which is same thing as saying 2,000 times 1.018. Right. So in a spreadsheet, that's just a formula, and then you just copy that all the way down, right? So you say, well, it's the number before times 1.018, right? So what's going to be in the second year? It's going to be 1.018 times this number right here. So that's 2,000, 1.018 times 1.018. Like you could do this with a calculator, but that would take you forever, right? So use a spreadsheet to do that, right? And then what's the next one going to be? 2,000 times 1.018 times 1.018 times 1.018. We're going to get a number, right? And if you keep going down, and you do what do you do over here? What's 2,000 times 1.03, right? That's the 3.1, right? That's the 3.1%, right? And that's 2,000 times 1.031 times 1.031. And the next one you do the same, you just keep doing that all the way down. But you only have to do it in a spreadsheet, you just do it once, and then you say, well, just do the number above, the number above, the number above times 1.018 or times 1.0131. And you just copy that formula all the way down, however many you need to go down, and it'll tell you the number for each one of these. And then you can go out and look out, what the number is, right? 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, 8, 9, 10 years from now, right? Like you could do these all by hand with a calculator, but you wouldn't want to do that. That's why we teach you how to use a spreadsheet in freshman year, sophomore year. Come on. Literally, that's one of the reasons. You let the machine do it, right? So then we can look at the number here, whatever that number is, and we can compare that number to that number. And they say, well, how much this is going to be bigger because it's growing at 3%. This one's growing at 1.8%. So we know that it's got to be bigger. The one over here has got to be bigger. Right? It's growing at a faster rate, right? So if this was a graph, right? and this is year 0, this is year 10, right? One is growing at 1.8%, the other one's growing at, right, 3.1%. So at year 10, this one's going to be bigger than that one, right? If this is GDP, or real GDP. So the question is, right? So this number is that one. This number is that one, right? So let's say these aren't going to be the right numbers, but let's just say this is what it is, right? So let's say that this is, I don't know, let's just say 5,000. That's not right. That's not right at all, actually, but let's just say it is. And this is 3,000. I'm just using this by way of explanation generally, right? So how much bigger is the 5,000 versus the 3,000? How do we figure that out? Well, the difference, right, is 5,000 minus 3,000, right? Divided by what? 3,000, right? Right, so we get 2,000 divided by 3,000, right? It's going to be, in this case, 0.66 or 66% bigger, right? Or 67% bigger, right? Another way you could do it is you could do, how much bigger is it? You could do 5,000 divided by 3,000, right? And that's going to be 1.66, and then you can multiply it, and then you can minus 1 off of that, and that's going to be 0.66. So there are a couple of different ways you could do it, but question is bigger. How much bigger? Well, if it was 6,000, it would be 100% bigger, right? Well, it's not. You're always comparing it to the small. You're comparing it to the smaller number. Right? So the solutions actually have the solutions actually have these numbers, right? If you look out the solutions for homework number 3, right, they're there. Those numbers are actually there. So you could use a spreadsheet and you could convince yourself that what I've written here, in terms of these actual numbers here, right, and how you would do it if you're doing it in a calculator, that you can convince yourself that those are the numbers that are correct from the spreadsheet numbers that I provide in the solutions. All I've done is cut and pasted the spreadsheet into the Word document and then PDF. So
essentially, like, so for the US and China question, they're the same thing.
Yep,
and
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Okay, so you just figure out which year will the numbers match up or be the closest.
Right. So these two questions match the handout we did in class exactly. We did one, but we did a really simple example in class. We had at the very beginning of chapter 6, sorry. We did an example where 2 countries start out at the same place, and then one grows faster than the other. Well, this isn't 2 countries. This is we start at the same place. We just use what if we did it? What if we were growing? You could think of it as 2 countries, but in this case, it's the same country. What if we grew at this rate versus that rate? It's the same exact question. And then the other one with China is essentially how long it was the other question we had on the and we did them over 2 class periods. In that handout, it was Japan, and I think in that case, I don't even remember. I think that was the case. I don't remember. I might have been. I don't think it was China, but Japan, and where one country started below the other one, and then how long would it take for the other country to catch up if they were growing faster? And that's exactly the China question. So it's exactly the same questions that we did in class. Conceptually, it's the same question, right? Same idea. Yeah. So your statement about that yes, yes, it's just another version of this. That's right. Just like it was in that worksheet that we did in class.
And we wouldn't have to worry about that kind of question on the exam, right? or
Not doing the actual calculation, but I could ask you that in terms of what we did in class. Actually, we didn't, and you may recall this, we didn't actually, I said we could do this and do it and figure it out exactly if we use the spreadsheet or if we use a different form or if we use the formula, but we can use what? The rule of 70 to estimate. When we did in class in the worksheet, we actually used the rule of 70 to do that. So the rule of 70 is an estimate where you don't have to do all of these every year. You do some chunks of it. And that's what we did on that worksheet. So I could absolutely ask you a question like this and relate it to the rule of 70 though. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But we wouldn't do one where you're actually calculating every year like that. No.
okay. I thought the rule of 70 was more for like when it the number of years it'll double. So like how does
That's correct. That's correct. That's right. That's right. So and so in the homework question, another part of that question was, what if we use the rule of 70? And you find out that it matches up pretty well with the spreadsheet. So you can use that to kind of estimate. You won't get the exact number necessarily, right? So in this example, if we did, if we did 70 divided by 1, I actually talk about this in the solutions, 70 divided by 1.8. So if it was 2, that would be 35 years. This is a little bit less, so it's maybe I'd have to calculate this. I don't know, maybe it's
it's like 38.
It's 38. I was gonna say about, yeah, so I was gonna say about that. Yeah. And then with 3.1%, 70 divided by 3.1, right? This is, if we just sort of did it as 3, it would be 20, 24-ish, 23.
Yeah, I got like
23.
22.5.
Yeah. So let's just call it 23. Just for right now. And so what you could do is, right, you could see, well, okay, if we go out 23, 46, right, 69, right, you'd use that, right? You could figure out, well, that, and then so if we did down here, we compare it down there, we're going to look at the row for year 23, right, etc. 46, 69. And then for this one, we'd want to put in like 38, right? And 76. So we could kind of see what these are compared to what these numbers are. And so and this is going to be then 23, it's going to be 91, right? So we can kind of get a feel for when we wouldn't get it exactly, right? But we could kind of see, we could kind of compare these two, for example, and we kind of see where we're at that point. You can see one was a lot bigger than the other. All right, so the spreadsheet, I can just use, we can use a formula too, but we're not doing that. But the spreadsheet, we can get it exact. So if I was using the rule of 70, maybe I'd pick nice numbers that work out nicely, maybe. Right. So that's it. That's the idea. So I could certainly ask a question like that with the rule of 70, right? But yes, we wouldn't, that would not be a good use of our time to try and calculate all those numbers, right? All right, I'm gonna call it a night here for the review session. Good questions, everybody. Everybody that's left, 2 of you. I will post this well, we'll start the posting process. It takes a while for YouTube to process the videos, especially an hour-long video. So it'll take a little while, but in an hour or two, it should be out there. And I'll post it in the announcements where it is. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. You have a good night.
All right. See you tomorrow. Fresh brain. Bring a fresh brain. All right. Bye.